I think all of them are online, so I can't go through the list at the moment. So anyway, welcome to you for this meeting as well. Can I have any disclosures of personal and prejudicial interest, please? Anybody? Sorry. Hannah. Is Hannah online? Is she? Hannah?
Hi, yes, could I declare a personal interest as an employee of SCVS and occasionally sit on the PSB board meetings?
Thank you, Hannah. You'll notice the advice from the monitoring officer, which was circulated this morning as well, in terms of membership of things like the Fire Authority. If you wish to declare it a personal interest, you want to declare it, but it's up to you. Terry.
I'm a member of the Fire Authority.
Thank you, because this is in relation to the PSB, Terry, because they're represented on the PSB.
Yeah, and there's a possibility I might be sitting it on behalf of the.
Yeah.
Waiting for that to come through.
Okay, so you're wearing two hats. I used to wear more than two. Okay, thank you. Right, item 3, prohibition of whip votes and declaration of party whips. I pause. No. Okay. Item 4 then is the minutes of the last meeting. So I'll just go through those for accuracy on page 1, page 2, page 3, page 4, page 5, and page 6. Are we happy that those minutes are accurate? Thank you very much. Excellent. Right, so that's we're going to move then on to public question time. I understand we've had no public questions received. So I'm going to move then on to item 6, which is scrutiny of the Swansea Public Services Board. Roger Thomas is here as the Vice Chair of the PSB Joint Committee. Are Rob and Andrea online? Andrew's online.
Yeah, Chair, I'm online. Can I just give apologies? Rob Stewart will be joining us, but he's delayed in another meeting.
Okay, do you or Roger want to introduce this item or say a few words beforehand?
Perhaps if I could bring Richard Rowlands in first, and then I'm sure Roger and I and other partners will want to contribute to the questions.
Okay, thank you, Richard.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just very briefly. So the report is on page 17 in your papers. It introduces the PSB annual report, which basically describes what has been done during 2021-2022 under each of the PSB's wellbeing objectives, which are described within the wellbeing plan. Just very quickly, in terms of the structure of the report, it starts on page 19 with an introductory section, which runs from page 21 to 35, and that covers the PSB's vision, its objectives, the various commitments, such as being a human rights city. It also covers the PSB's governance arrangements and the way that the PSB works sustainably in order to meet those wellbeing objectives, and seeks to maximise its contribution to the national goals. The main body of the report describes the work that's been progressed in 2021-2022 under each of the wellbeing objectives, and that runs from page 36, starting with the early years objective, and then concludes on page 94 with the strong communities objective. And then each section lists the lead partner and the other partners and stakeholders who are also involved in each of the objectives. And then the whole report concludes on page 107 with the next steps, which is really the work which is underway to develop the next wellbeing plan. Thank you, Chair.
You need to add anything, Andrea or Roger?
Nothing specific to add. Happy to go to the questions.
Okay, thank you very much.
I don't know if Roger wants to add anything, Chair.
Roger?
No, likewise, Chair, happy to take any questions on the report.
Okay, thank you. I have to say that the days when these reports are not printed as long past, otherwise you would have gone through an entire forest, I think, in terms of all the reports we've been presented with today. I've got Councillor Chris Holly, who wants to ask the first question on the performance framework. Chris.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you both for attending the scrutiny board. But I think the time has come to ask the decision about where are we with performance monitoring. Obviously, you know, when it was set up, it's quite new in existence. So we have waited a while to see what's happening about performance. The problem is the report is quite long, quite detailed and what have you, but it doesn't give any indication of what actually you've done. and what you're going to do and set up a performance monitoring. So I was wondering where we are with that and what the timescale will be on it.
Thank you, Chair. If I can come in first of all to respond to that.
Of course.
So obviously, competing demands on limited resources will remain an ongoing challenge for all our partners. However, in developing the next steps for the 2023-2028 wellbeing plan, we will specify the actions, the milestones and the expected outputs. And we'll also work within our resource envelope to identify relevant population indicators so that we can measure progress and performance more clearly than we have in the past. So I won't prolong my response, but I know there are other partners, including Roger as Vice Chair on the call today. So and hand over to partners if they wish to add anything further.
Anybody else? No? Chris, did you want to come back?
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, Angie, and I can believe to some extent. I can understand exactly what you're saying. The problem I think we have looking at this report is that there's a lot of words and good intentions, but at the moment that's what it is, isn't it? And I understand. I think everybody understands that. But we have been here for a while, and we have considered some of the things on here. But one thing I would like to ask you is, what are these performance monitoring goals going to be, and what will be the public input into them? Because one of the things about well-being and some of the other strands will rely on quite a lot of input from the public, and I was wondering how you're going to do that, and over what timescales.
Roger, do you want to?
Sorry, Chair. Yeah, I was just going to say I can see Roger's indicated and Richard.
Okay, Roger, do you want to come in?
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Hawley. I think you make valid points. I'm certainly not going to hide behind the fact that some of the progress has not been, or we certainly haven't moved to a point where we are saying actually we've got way markers and milestones that we're moving towards. I think some of the qualitative issues are quite difficult to actually to put a you can put a narrative against it, but they are quite complex in nature. When you're talking about perhaps the way people feel, if it's a feeling of perhaps feeling safe or unwell or stronger communities or whatever, a lot of those things are quite difficult actually to measure. It's not a reason why we shouldn't measure them. I think some of the quantitative measures then can be, and I think we feel safe sometimes in quantitative measurement, and that it feels you move from one place to another. But what actually has achieved, I'm not sure. I think on top of that, and this is a truism rather than a hiding behind it. I think COVID has significantly impacted in the last 2 years our ability to move some of this work on. I think it means that we've all retrenched to a degree into our own sort of statutory functions. We moved back to a little bit more siloed working. I think the relationships we built up in the early stages of the PSB, a little bit of ground has been lost as well. And I think if I move back, and I'm somebody who sort of goes back to the implementation of this work in this first phase, I think we were very aspirational at that time. We were very much of what we can do. There was the art of the possible. And I think what we've learned over the last 4 or 5 years is that we probably need to scale back some of that work and really focus on certain things that we can deliver, as opposed to this. It was almost seen as a catch-all. And when you have a process which is, and we'll say it as it is, it's not funded. There is no additional funding that comes into this. So it's very much we have to make do with existing budgets. It's a point I've made back to Welsh Government on a number of occasions that even if it was hypothecated funding that was directed for a collaborative purpose, I think that would at least get some of these things off the ground. And I think the final point I'd make as well is that we're trying to measure, in some cases, some counterfactual things that haven't happened. There is an awful lot of work that's gone on, and also a lot of things that predated the PSBs in LSBs, a lot of partnership working that went on that is continuing and is growing and evolving. But I absolutely take the point, and I think it's well made, that that we do need to move towards a stronger performance measurement, and I accept that wholeheartedly, Councillor.
Can I just say that I totally agree with the fact that a lot of this aspirational and a lot of the measures that you would have to do would be very difficult to capture because of the very nature of them. How do you know if somebody's well? How do you know what well-being is? How do you know if somebody's happy or what have you? So, you know, and safety is a very, very difficult one to measure. If you ask the police about what people feel about safety, the fear of crime is greater than the crime itself. So I well understand that, but you know, one of the reasons that this board was set up and by the Welsh Government was actually to have this catch-all that we have in front of us. And thank you very much for your answer, and I look forward to something in the future.
Before I
Thank
bring
you,
Richard,
Chair.
before I
Sorry,
bring
can I
Richard,
can I just make one more point, Chair, just on that? And some of the frustrations I've had, and I've certainly raised with Welsh Government at a political level, or sort of a national political level, I should say, is that there doesn't appear to be, from Welsh Government perspective, you don't hear Welsh Government talking about public services boards to any great degree. I've been to WLGA conferences where a lot of other things are raised and debated at a national level, and yet PSBs don't appear. Now, whether I'm missing something or that other people will tell you that that's not the case, but I certainly don't hear that, and I do mix it so at senior political levels, and it's not something it certainly come out of Welsh Government unfunded, and doesn't appear, to the best of my ability and my knowledge, to be something that the Welsh Government have kept at the top of the political agenda, if that makes sense.
I have to say, as an Assembly member, when the Act went through the Welsh Assembly, I think they had a similar attitude towards it then as well. It wasn't a major priority. I'll bring in a second tab. Roger, sorry, Richard wants. I'm going to bring in Richard now. I just want to ask a further question on the back of Chris's in terms of the consultation next year in relation to the new wellbeing plan. Will that consultation at that stage include performance indicators which we can measure, or is that going to come later on? Maybe Richard can answer that. Yeah, Richard.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I mean, just more broadly on the point of using quantitative indicators, KPIs. KPIs are good for measuring how much we're doing of something. They're good at measuring how well we do it. They're not so good at trying to measure outcomes and the impact that something is having on a group of people. That's where the qualitative information comes in, and it's sometimes more effective to be able to tell stories and put the context around quantitative data. I think going forward, population-based indicators are probably where we're going to be looking, particularly in terms of the resource that we have to be able to develop measurement frameworks. Having a KPI framework is very resource intensive. It's intensive to collect data, to process data, to report the data. Population indicators, particularly if we're able to use some of the measures produced by Welsh Government or some other sources as well, where the heavy lifting is already done, then that would also perhaps be an area that we can explore. Some work on that was done previously at the start of this wellbeing plan. It wasn't progressed because of resource issues, but I think that's perhaps an area where we can focus going forward. And just to answer that final question, Chair, I think that is probably something that we will look to do after the development of the wellbeing plan.
Okay, and what sort of timescale afterwards? Will it be months, a year, 2 years?
I hope it won't be that long. I mean, May 2023 is when the wellbeing plan will be produced. So I think if we can look at the information that's already out there, and if we can find population indicators which are relevant to what comes through the wellbeing plan, then I hope we'll be able to have some in place sooner rather than later.
Okay, Terry, you had a follow-up question?
Yeah, two quick ones. The first one is the PSB still open to the public? And the second one's for the Chief Fire Officer. How many PSBs do the Midland West Wales Fire Authority and Rescue attend?
Okay, I'm sure Roger can answer both those questions. Roger? You muted, I think.
Yeah, sorry. Just to come back with the first one, yes, it is open to the public, and we do invite public to come in and ask questions, specifically in the same manner as was on this agenda. So public questions are welcomed. It is a public forum. The second, in terms of looking at our own organisation, so Midland West Wales Fire Rescue Authority covers 6 local authority areas. We are represented at a senior level, and not only from a fire authority which is our governance model above, but also the senior director level. So myself and the deputy chief and assistant chief would we cover 2 each. And in terms of just a little bit more information in and around that, the previous chief, Chris Davis, delegated the authority to directors prior to that. I've kept my role on Swansea and Neath Patrol, but moving up from deputy to chief fire officer, because I recognise the value in building those partnerships, those networks that are already set up, and I wanted to maintain those going forward. And I see the value. I certainly see the value at a senior level on that. So yeah, we cover 6 local authorities, and that is a huge ask. And beyond that strategic level input at a strategic board level, we, at the last count, I think we attend some 44 subgroup meetings, so across the 6. So it's a huge ask for and in relative terms, a small organisation as opposed to a local authority. And local authorities obviously are represented on a single public service boards, or sometimes in an emerged, not in this case, but an emerged public service setting, which we've seen certainly into South and East Wales. But yeah, it is a significant ask for a relatively small organisation when we compare to local authorities. So that is something that we do factor in, but we do commit as a statutory partner wholeheartedly into the PSB movement.
Just to say, Chair, 6 and no funding.
Yeah, we're well aware, Terry, thank you. We're going to work our way through the questions we agreed in the pre-meeting. So, Councillor Francesca O'Brien. It's the red one. That's it.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair. Yeah, thank you for the report. That was a really interesting read on a Sunday evening, and all the different partners with their own sort of unique initiatives within the community. The only question I had was, what are the partners doing together to tackle the issues? Do you think it was highlighted enough in the report? So it was just more to do what, I appreciate what you're doing individually, which is fantastic, but what are you doing sort of together amongst the partnerships to tackle the issues, and if it can be highlighted a bit more? Thank you.
Okay, I see Andrea's got a hand up first. Andrea.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you for the question. The reality is we have been in the midst of a pandemic, and so the collaborative working isn't probably what it could have been, but I have to say where the PSB adds value is certainly in terms of the networking and the connections that we've made. So in terms of pandemic working, those networks have been invaluable. The links with the health board, the police, the fire service, all those emergency services in terms of a collaborative approach. But I have to stress that, and I think it's a fair question to point out that we need to illustrate and give examples more of the collaborative working that the PSB offers. So this will be a focus in terms of the development of the new wellbeing plan. Criteria that we will be using to evaluate those potential steps are leadership from one or more partners, existing or potential funding and resource, the best fit. I think we have to ask ourselves, is it better to be with the PSB or something already being delivered by alternative governance? And so we do need to test ourselves to make sure that the PSB is not duplicating, but is giving additional value. The difference it makes to people's lives, as has been mentioned, very difficult to measure, but we should still keep our focus on that. The 5 ways of working, and of course the contribution to the national wellbeing goals. I do note that NRW have given apologies for the meeting today. So I think it wouldn't be remiss of me to mention something that is working extremely well, which is the green infrastructure work, both with NRW and the council. We've continued to pool staff resources and the project funding to work on a county-wide green infrastructure strategy, which aims to deliver across a range of the PSB objectives with all the 4 work streams. This has been hugely successful and has also included green infrastructure training for local people and businesses. So that's just one example of how the PSB has made a difference. And I note other partners, including Roger and Amanda, have indicated. So I'll hand over to them for their views on that question as well. Thank you.
Okay, Roger.
Yeah, if I could, thanks for the question, Councillor, really good. And I think, as I stated previously, partnership working certainly predated PSB, so a lot of this work was already in train, but it's about strengthening those links. I think if I can make one sort of COVID example, a lot of work went on in terms of emergency services. So we picked up obviously the strain that was under emergency services, particularly ambulance service through COVID. A lot of that work was picked up assisting ambulance driving people to get their vaccinations. So a lot of partners came together to work and assist and take some of the strain off local health services. And one particular example, and I know Councillor Lewis has made reference to NRW and a lot of good work has gone on. So some 2 years ago, small grants were made available to every PSB within Wales via NRW, Natural Resources Wales. So £25,000 was made available, and partners were invited to put bids in. So in terms of the fire service, we put a bid in for £8,000 for some fire breaks, which we used as I call it a proof of concept, really. So we cut fire breaks in Fairwood Common. So a lot of the wildfires that would rage across there, particularly you've seen it this summer and a couple of years ago during the long hot summer of some 2018, 2019. So we cut fire breaks there, proof of concept. So not only was the impact of wildfires in terms of our own operational response, but the impact on local grazers and farmers and livestock as well mitigated. We will also then use that as a proof of concept to make a grant into Welsh Government ourselves for what they call an eye cutter. It's effectively a large lawnmower. I'll use those sort of terms, but it's a lot more technical than that. It's a remote device that we can use and deploy on all types of terrain to cut fire breaks and to mitigate the impact of wildfires across the Swansea area. That's been extremely successful. So a grant of £50,000 was secured for that. As a result of that, then obviously a proof of concept that came from a PSB work alone into Welsh Government, and then that vehicle has been purchased and is now operational and used across our service area to hit back. There's also an impact then, obviously, anything that burns releases carbon into the atmosphere. So we're hitting another agenda issue of ours in terms of carbon release and the impact on net zero, which we're all working to in 2030. And finally, we put a bid in. The NRW have now withdrawn those sort of grant funding, but they've made a wider grant available for partners to put into. And we put in two bids again. The most notable, the one I will make reference to, is geofencing. So bear with me, because some of this I found extremely interesting and extremely challenging at the same time. So effectively, geofencing allows livestock to wear a device around their neck, which will keep them within a certain area in terms of grazing. So you'll all be familiar with impact on the Gower. Last year alone, some 71 animals were killed who drifted onto roadwork. So that's livestock, cattle, sheep, and the like. So not only causing road traffic incidents, the death of livestock and the impact on local economy, on farmers and the like. So this geofencing will, and a proven technology, keeps them within a certain area, allows us to graze certain areas to allow them to be, to keep wildfires down as well. So the impact across a fairly simple solution like that is going to be quite considerable. So in terms of the partnership working and the benefit to multiple agencies, I think an example of that is what we've done already, what we are planning to do in the future is something that's tangible and something will produce a result and a measurable outcome in the future as well.
Thank you, Roger. Amanda Carr from SCVS as well. Amanda.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'm obviously not a statutory partner, so there as an invited partner. I'm not going to claim that everything I'm going to say is directly related to the PSB, but I do think that there are strong links and connections, and also the ability to kind of work with those further in the future. So for me, there are some really clear examples of things that our organisation is involved with. I'd like to reference the Human Rights City work, and I think that's been a really strong piece of PSB-led multi-agency work. So there's that one for me. I think there's a lot of work, and I'm aware that Philip McDonnell is on the call. I know that I sit in the Regeneration Swansea Partnership, which, whilst it's local authority facilitated, it is actually very much a multi-agency partnership. And I've seen some amazing things happen within that space, particularly around green infrastructure in the city centre, and very much led by NRW within the partnership. So there are things that I think we really can claim, you know, do have a link, because we've worked together in the PSB space, which means that we do, I think, as Andrea, you know, pointed out, that gives us the connections then, when we're sort of looking at other pieces of work that might be organisation specific. I think there's another one for me, which is that the local authority and the third sector have a compact arrangement, which is where we come together as equal partners with equal numbers of across the council officers and representatives from the third sector, to be able to focus on the relationships between the local authority and the third sector specifically. So I'm only talking two PSB partners here in terms of third sector as well. But actually that gives us a really good opportunity to have a safe space in which to explore issues. There are similar arrangements, unfortunately not a PSB compact, but similar ones, both with the Police and Crime Commissioner's Office and also the Health Board. And then there are some very specific pieces of work with other PSB partners. So, for example, at the moment, the Health Board is focusing on putting together a third sector procurement framework, and that is very much a co-produced sort of new arrangement, actually, whereas previously it would have been sort of commissioning of services. The Health Board and the third sector come together in the same space to look at the combined strength, the gaps, the population needs, how we can work together. So I think there really are things that, whilst some things might end up being stronger relationships with individual organisations, there is for me a direct link with the PSB. We probably haven't shouted enough about these in terms of the annual report. There are really strong links with Roger and his team in terms of the third sector and its use of the safe and well service that the fire service offers. But I think for me, just reflecting very quickly on the COVID connection, which Andrea referenced, where partners, you know, came together in their response. Lots of the things that Roger also described, you know, transport to vaccination centres. There was a huge third sector involvement in that. And I suppose for me, there's something about looking forward and looking at the inevitable other sort of crises that we'll face, particularly related to climate change and nature emergency, how we might create the PSB as the strong link between us, building on the COVID experience in the resilience space as well.
Thank you, Amanda. You want to come back, Francesca? You happy? No, okay.
No, thank you all for your responses. It's really interesting. I just think it needs to be highlighted. You need to sort of jump out and say what you're doing sometimes, because otherwise, if you don't do it, no one else is it? So no, thank you all. Okay,
got some specific questions, so I'm going to Councillor Mike White.
Sorry, Chair, could I just come in on that very point? You know, it is right for Francesca to highlight that perhaps we don't, and as Amanda said, we don't shout about it enough. I think, you know, taking that on board, it might be good for us in future reports to include examples of some excellent partnership work in which is coming out of the PSB, which is a sort of quick reference, so that we can sort of highlight, you know, the good work that we're doing working together. So we will take that away and try and improve on that. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Mike White. You're still muted, Mike.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah, can I say, you know, thank you for putting a very comprehensive report together. What I would like to know, seeing that we're striving for a healthy city, under the Swansea local wellbeing, and it's relation to air quality, are you able to provide examples of any areas or roads that have seen an improvement in air quality? Thank you, Chair.
Any volunteers?
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you to Councillor White for the question. I do know, as I'm sure Councillor White is aware, that we've got the Mortar Distributor Road in the Landor ward. That has inevitably had an impact on improving air quality on Neath Road through the Harvard. We haven't got the figures to hand today, but I'm sure that we'll be able to source that data and supply it after this meeting. Thank you, Chair.
Given that you've got the NRW represented and the Environment Centre and the voluntary sector, do you have any sort of feedback to the PSB meetings in terms of air quality data, etc.?
We haven't got that data available today, I'm afraid.
No, but
sure
does it come to committee? Does it come to your meetings on a regular basis?
Air quality, well, the thing is, what we're doing at the moment, going through the new wellbeing plan, is we're going to be using one of the subgroups to target climate and nature recovery, and it will be very much a focus of that group. So, it is intended that the partners are going to be really focused on the climate emergency and nature recovery. And of course, air quality will be very much part of that communication and conversation. As you know, as a council, we are looking to green our fleet, which is making our contribution towards, and we've got the Green Fleet strategy. What we'd like to see through the subgroup is, sharing those good examples across the organisations, and also potentially looking at collaborative procurement so that we can join forces and green our fleets and look at charging infrastructure, potentially sharing electric vehicle and hydrogen infrastructure moving forward as organisations. So I know that Roger and the fire service have done a lot of work around this as well, so I'm not going to steal any thunder there, Chair.
Yeah, Roger wants to come in as well. Thanks, Andrea. Roger?
Yeah, thanks, Andrea. Just on top of that, it was Martin Nichols came in and do a presentation in his previous role a couple of years ago, and we picked up on some of the impact that we'd had in terms of carbon release. As a result of that, we put a bid in, and an academic piece of work will soon start, which will give us, not quickly, I get that, in 2 or 3 years' time, will give us some measurable outcomes in terms of the work that we're doing on a future direction as well, in terms of some of the preventive work that we do, and the impact in terms of the reduction in carbon release into the atmosphere as well. So that piece of academic work with Swansea University and Sussex University in collaboration will provide us some of that feedback in due course as well.
Okay. Mike, do you need to come back? Are you happy?
Yeah, just to say that I look forward to seeing those figures if possible. If that's okay by the chair of the PSB.
Okay, I'm sure we'll come to those in the future meetings when all the stuff is published. Right, Councillor Rebecca Fogarty's got a couple of questions.
Thanks. So we started by talking about performance framework. I am conscious that we need to avoid generating a whole industry around potentially quite short-term performance indicators when the ambition of the PSB is, really strategic and really cross-cutting. But I was interested in the annual report where you've pulled out some of the 50 national wellbeing indicators, which for me are kind of some of the ultimate proof of the impact of this work. I was interested in what the rationale was for the specific ones that were highlighted, and whether these could be in future years more directly related to the 4 wellbeing objectives. In particular, I didn't see so many on the early years or the working with nature objectives. Thank you.
Andrea?
Yes, and apologies in advance for a relatively lengthy response to this question. So the measures included in recent annual reports, including the latest chapter, pages 11 to 13, were originally selected following the PSB work in 2018 on developing a population level wellbeing measurement framework. The chapter in the first annual report for 2018-19 notes, in October 2018, a wellbeing measures workshop was held at Technium 2, University Wales Trinity St David. This was a joint workshop of the PSB's research and planning subgroups, which considered draft proposals for an initial basket of population level measures, focusing on the national indicators to inform an initial view of the wellbeing in Swansea. So the measures were identified based on systematic exercise, which looked at national indicators, thriving places measures, and their links to the national goals. And so we are driven by, the point I'm trying to make is we are driven by these frameworks. However, in a recent workshop with the PSB, what we've done is tried to focus on some headlines in terms of what the PSB, where we can add value. I mentioned climate emergency and nature recovery being one of the subgroups. So we will try and narrow that focus, and I'm sure we can recirculate, although I believe it is referred to in the report, we can recirculate those headlines in terms of the focus of the subgroups that we will be concentrating on. Particularly to try and prioritise and add more value. So the point is well raised. On a PSB level, we are trying to drill down to a more focused approach. Hopefully that responds to the question.
Okay, Rebecca.
Yeah, and that's fine. Am I right to take my second question now? Yeah, so does the PSB have an idea of why the proportion of adults in Swansea feeling safe has fallen so dramatically? Even if we take the figure at the upper end of the range with the 95% confidence interval, it's still quite a drop. And are there plans for work to address that particular issue?
Yeah, so if I could just highlight quickly that those figures are sourced, as you probably know, from the Welsh Government's National Survey for Wales. Since the latest annual report was published, more recently, the figures available for 21-22 show that the Swansea has bounced back to 60% of people feeling safer. And this is closer to our figure, which was in 2016-17. So the trend is stabilising. In terms of why people didn't feel as safe, my personal view, and I stress it's my personal view, is that this could have been during the pandemic, where people were generally feeling less safe in public spaces and less safe to leave home. However, the Welsh Government analysis doesn't have any drilling down of commentary or detail, so we would have to do some further investigation to draw out the reasons why that was the case.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks. I think that's really helpful and really heartening to hear that there is already a significant bounce back. Thanks.
Okay. Paxton, did you still want to ask a question?
Thank you, Chairman. I don't really know where to go with this, to be honest, because those of us who've been involved for a long time in either the LSB or the PSB scrutiny have always expressed our concerns, I think, about what has been achieved. Now, obviously, we've got lots of qualitative information, and we seriously lack quantitative information, and that's been talked about today quite clearly. Worries me to hear Mr. Thomas say that he thinks that the Welsh Government has lost interest in PSBs and what role and what they're doing. Certainly they impose quite a major bureaucratic burden in that sense. They will know that from the number of meetings he has to meet the settlers he's already outlined. And it is a concern if, having put it in place, Welsh Government decides, well, are we going to really pursue it? And it seems to be not the case. And certainly in developing relationships, I would have thought the PSB can't have been the only ways of doing that. And one of the things that probably has come out of COVID, and perhaps the only good thing, has been a very close working that has been achieved, particularly by the Council, the Health Board and the third sector. And we've seen huge advances there, and those need to be kept. And I'm sure nobody's going to argue about that. On a very parochial note, talking about Fairwood Common, seeing as I'm a member for Fairwood, obviously very pleased to see the fire breaks. I'm not going to argue that. And electric or electro fencing, I think, is the way forward for keeping animals safe. Certainly, the year before last, we lost about 90 animals around the area, which was incredible and a big drain for the farmers. I think it's been a bit less this summer, but we've continued to work on that and see if we can get it down. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, anybody want to comment on that, or Andrea?
Yeah, can I just comment very briefly on, Councillor Hood-Williams' concerns about the value that the Public Service Board contributes or adds. And I have to say that having been on chairing the PSB for a number of years now and being involved, I have a far higher level of confidence in the new wellbeing plan and the new way forward. The PSB is far more focused, and I'm sure that partners will come together in terms of adding extra additional value. As I said in my earlier response, that is something that we will be very focused on to avoid duplication and make sure that the PSB adds additional value. So just to give a reassurance, really, that I do feel more confident now than I have in the past that the Public Service Board will deliver excellent collaboration and partnership working across the partners, and particularly not just the statutory partners, but across the wider partners as well. So I'm just going to give that assurance, and I'm sure when we come back to you to report at future scrutiny meetings that will be apparent, and you will see the work that we're progressing. I'm sure Roger might come in on the other points you raised about Fairwood Common.
Okay, I think Paxton wants to come back first, and then if Roger wants to follow up, then that's fine.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to say, I hope in terms of what Councillor Lewis has just said, I hope that comes to pass. And certainly, I think is what we would all like to see is better services for the people that we serve. And if you can use this more effectively than it's been used in the past to achieve that, then that's got to be good. And everybody would wish you well in that, I think.
Okay.
Thank you.
Roger hasn't indicated he wants to come back, so she'll move on to the next question. Okay, Councillor Lyndon Jones has sent his apologies, so I'll read out the question he wanted to ask, which is, we noted a public survey was carried out as part of the development of the new assessment of local wellbeing. There's around 330 responses to that survey. I'm just asking you, are you satisfied with the level of response, public response to that, and the input from the survey? Is that roughly what you expected? Roger? So you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I think Andrew was first, but I'm happy to go first if you are, Andrea.
I'm happy to, if it's okay, if I can just come in quickly on that response. So I think it's something that in general, I mean, no disrespect, but scrutiny today had no public questions, and I'm not sure if anybody's sitting in the public gallery. So trying to reach the public through the mechanisms that we use is difficult. Obviously, we'd want to see more public interest. But I would just give an assurance, the PSB did try to maximise the public response to the survey. The pandemic did impact on a number of levels. The survey was circulated to statutory, local and national consultees, and others identified in terms of contacts with the partnership. Partners were also asked to promote the consultation and circulate to their contacts and networks, and the general public were alerted to the consultation not just via the the council website, but also our social media channels. So despite these best efforts, the volume of response wasn't particularly high, but anecdotally, I believe this has been the experience of the 2022 assessments consultations for PSBs elsewhere in Wales. So it is likely an effect of the pandemic, and we're not alone. Other Welsh councils found themselves in this same position as well.
I have to say, given the volume of paper, I thought 330 was actually quite a high response. But Roger, do you want to come in?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And I think just to add to Andrea's comments, yeah, I think, are we happy? The short answer is no. I think to provide a little bit of context, and as I say, Councillor Hennigan raised the fact that we cover 6 local authority areas. I'll call it the old Dyfed, Ceredigion, Carmarthenshire and Pembrokeshire, had an average of under 50 responses in their areas. That's not to say that that our response is great and is something, but in context, it's reasonably good. It is if I take it down to perhaps a more granular level within the Fire and Rescue Service, we find this a struggle year on year. We cover some nearly 1 million people across our area, and I think the last consultation we had, which I led from the front, and we had some 240, 250 responses. It's incredibly difficult. However, and I'll furnish a further example, some 10 years ago, when it was mooted that we would look to close some stations. At the time, I was county commander of Carmarthenshire, and one of the stations we were looking at that time, or it was proposed for a potential closure, was Pontiets, which lies on the road between Carmarthen and Llanelli. And I went to a public meeting there. I chaired a public meeting there, and the whole it was like the whole village was there. So I think if you deal with a singular issue, if you are dealing with something that is either a closure or a removal of a public service, I think people do get engaged. But unfortunately, the volume of information that's out there these days through various, either it's social media, or we are bombarded daily, 24 hour news. And I think it's just an overkill from a lot of people. And I think certainly from a younger generation, it's not how we communicate with them. It's not how they communicate back either. They are more likely to do likes or something on a social media page than a traditional form. And I include myself in that traditional form of communication, because it's we have to adapt, and I think we have to change in terms of engagement with the public if we want to really get and to measure the sort of zeitgeist out there.
I think it's a truism, Roger, that where you have an issue which affects the public directly, they will turn out in numbers. But when you have a general strategic document like this, or even just talking about their general well-being, then people will, they live busy lives, and so they won't necessarily respond to that. But maybe think about how we can consult to take that into account in the future, I suppose, is difficult. Amanda, you want to come in?
Yeah, completely agree with all the points already made. From a third sector and community level perspective, we're being told all the time we've just had enough of surveys and consultations. And it's even like a recognised term now, like survey fatigue. So I think that's a real factor. But just to flag, and apologies, I really cannot off the top of my head remember the figures. But just picking up on the single issue thing, the Human Rights City consultation did, I think, Andrea, I'm looking at you, apologies. I do think that did get a broader response, but it did merge a little bit of the survey and also the interaction with particular communities of interest identity, and that did therefore kind of generate, I suppose, an increased response that was then able to feed into the planning of that work.
Yeah, thank you for that. Does anybody else want to ask a question? Terry Hennigan?
It's not a question, Chairman. It's what I picked up, what we found when we was doing surveys in Penderfynu or Blaen and Mice and Portmead, when we had our carnivals and those sort of events. Whereas we could send out, say, 500 surveys, we'd be likely to get, say, 50 back. Whereas at the carnival, people are sitting down, they're relaxed, the kids are playing. We find we get anything up to about 600 out of 1,000. And this is something that local authorities don't seem to take. But the fire authority actually go to the Royal Welsh Show and do that sort of thing, which is another feather in their cap.
Yeah, thanks. You put something on for the kids, the parents will follow, isn't it? Yeah. Okay, unless there's no more questions, can I thank you very much for coming along, all the members of the PSB who are mostly online. Can I thank you very much? It's been very helpful, and we'll most probably meet again at some stage next year, most probably just before your wellbeing plan, and then we'll have another session once the wellbeing plan is out to consultation, most probably. So thank you very much for attending today on this particular item. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Right, we're going to move on now to the next item 7, which is the pre-decision scrutiny on the Oracle project investment update. I think the leader, Councillor Rob Stewart, is with us, and Councillor Andrea Lewis. And we've also got Sarah Lackenby, the head of digital and customer service, with us as well. I'm not sure what other officers you've got with you, Sarah, but Rob, do you want to introduce this item?
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. I was very grateful as well, as usual, for the foresight of some of the questions and areas you'd like to probe. So very keen to get into that. What I would say is just a reflection, really, and a recall and a recap for members. You'll remember that we were beginning this process just as the pandemic hit. So you'll know we've made some initial allocations to try and get Oracle transformation underway. But of course, during the pandemic, our priorities had to change significantly in terms of what our resources had to do. And that was something that I'm sure this committee will recall, because I was grateful for the committee's praise of officers working in these areas, where we were one of the first councils to get out the payments to businesses, to residents, the various waves of support that we had throughout the pandemic from the governments. Obviously, they had to take priority over some of the transformational migration activities that we were planning to do over that period. And, that was just a matter of, reality. There was no way that we could not pass or not focus on getting help out to people. In addition to that, of course, with these types of migrations and types of multi-agency projects, we were also reliant on staff that weren't based in the UK to assist with the migration from other partners that are aspects of the system. So you'll remember that the waves of the COVID pandemic did not hit at the same time in the same country. So when we were coming out of a particular wave, other parts of the world would be going into one. And I think you just need to bear that in mind when you're looking at the profiling of this programme. I think that the headline takeaway on this is that when you look at all of the decisions Cabinet's taken since 2019 to support the delivery of this project, which spans that 2-year period, including the 18 months or so for COVID, all of the cost increases that are highlighted there for you are directly related to COVID. So what we have is a change in the costs from 4.8 million to an assumed 10.7, but 6.1 of that is directly associated with the COVID costs. And we have, myself and the Chief Executive, have and are pursuing that currently with Welsh Government on the basis of commitments made by governments at the time to ensure that any additional costs that were picked up by councils which relate to COVID are ones that potentially could be reimbursed either in part or in full. Now, if you do the maths and you take the 6.1 from the 10.7, assuming we don't need the contingency, but although it's wise to have a contingency there just in case, then it gets you back roughly to where we thought we would be, which is the 4.8 million. So again, I hope that's helpful, Chair, in terms of taking people through not only a recap of the timeframes and the environment we were working in at the time, but also the budgetary numbers in terms of how that adds up. And I guess I just end my intro by saying, really, again, I pay tribute to Sarah and her staff and all of the staff in the various departments who've really had their shoulder to the wheel on this for a long time now. We are in the home straight, and we do anticipate a go live next year of this, and that's where the final drawdown of the monies that have been set aside is now important to get us to that go live position. But again, our view is that if you discount all of the 6.1 million which we're pursuing with Welsh Government, it gets you exactly back to where we thought we'd be. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Rob. Can I just clarify on the cost here, because back in January when this was in front of us, we established that the cost at that stage was 8.5 million, which was in the letter which we sent to the Cabinet member, which wasn't challenged and in fact was confirmed by officers then. You're now asking for 2.8 million on top of that. I make that 11.3 million.
Yeah, so just on that, Chair, there was a 2.5 million ICT reserve set aside, which was also potentially to be utilised with this programme. And that additional element that you've mentioned there does include a contingency of a further 500,000. But at the present time, The numbers I have is that we're heading towards 10.7 as a total rather than 11.2. So the 11.2 is the higher envelope. But if we don't use that, then, as I said, we're largely of a position of around 4.7, 4.8 million as a real applicable cost when you strip out the COVID impacts.
I made 11.3, but what's 100,000 between friends, hey?
Well, we won't lose 100,000. It's going to be needed in the coming months.
Exactly, yeah. So in terms of this contingency, you're confident this contingency will not be used?
Well, you can't say it can't be used. It's there. Yeah. A contingency is there for that purpose, so that we don't have to rush to make further financial movements if we need to. But on the advice I have from the officers and the teams working really hard on this at the moment is that the current budget is set at 10.7, just over 10.7, with a further 500,000 of contingency set aside. And when you consider the numbers involved, it's a reasonable contingency to be assumed there. Okay,
it's just that when you read the cabinet report, reading between the lines, the officers who wrote that report don't seem confident that it will not require any further resource. In fact, they depend on suppliers, it depends on necessary staff resource being made available, and it does read as if, well, we think we can bring it in on time and on the budget which we now have, assuming the cabinet pass this on Thursday. But they're not entirely confident that's going to happen.
Yeah, I won't, sugarcoat it. I mean, there are risks in these types of programs, but nobody can be immune to some of the turmoil that's going on at the moment. We aren't sure what changes to tax systems and other pay awards, changes to any agreements that may be made in terms of settlements, all of which potentially will compete for officer time and for resource time in terms of changes that may need to be made to systems. Or for work to be processed through those systems. What we've been trying to do at the moment is to ensure we've got as stable a position as possible and essentially as close to a freeze as we can in terms of unplanned changes. But of course, we're not always in control of all of those. If governments make announcements on certain things, if deals are done in terms of pay awards, other aspects of financial payments, etc. There could be further help, although unlikely, given statements by the Chancellor. There could be other things that impact finance and other departments that we will need to take a view on, because, again, if money's made available by government to help people with things like the energy crisis or other stuff, then we'll obviously want to respond to that. So there is always that element of risk in there. But, as I said, we are now in the home straight, and we would hope that early next year, we will see this finalised and over the line.
Okay, I see Andrea's taken a hand down. Did you want to add anything, Andrea?
No, I was only going to raise the point that the leader has made in terms of there are things which are out of our control in terms of pay awards. And so there are uncertainties which we cannot control. So, we need that contingency there just in case, because if there are things which draw the team away, and we have done mitigation in terms of making sure that each service and each department has dedicated resource to this programme, but there are things which, as we know to date, have called on resources in terms of delivering grants to our residents. And I'm sure nobody would disagree that we shouldn't have done that, because that was obviously something that we should prioritise. So the contingency is there as a safety net, but I would hope that we wouldn't need to use it. But obviously we can't guarantee that with uncertainties like the pay awards, as the leader has mentioned.
Okay, I've got Councillor Chris Holly who's got some specific questions on the financial aspects of it. Chris?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Leader. Thank you, Andrea. On table 1, page 6 of 9 on our report, it goes through the results of the pandemic, which you rightly pointed out. And then it's got new activity, which is 1.02 million. There you've got budget allocate for possible chargeable or changeable charges requests from merged part of the payroll runs, additional contingency budget offset. Can you explain that? Because when because we've done this before on both sides, as you know, Leader. And when this happened before, when we'd done the payroll runs, I seem to remember that all the liability was with the Oracle, well, in this case, Oracle, with the other cases, it was Capgemini. That was responsibility was theirs because the parallel runs had to be done as part of the contract. Why are we actually paying for it again? That's the first question. The additional reports, I'm assuming those are reports that would be coming back and forth to Cabinet and to the auditors or wherever, because that's a further 354,000 seems an awful lot. And license costs, again, I find that quite difficult to understand because of following Oracle's audit. What does that mean?
Yeah, I'll hand
If
over
you
to.
haven't got the answers, a written answer we'll have to do, I know, but this is going to Cabinet on Thursday, and this is a tremendous amount of money, £1 million extra for things which I have to say should have been in the contract.
I'm sure we have officers here who can give that answer today, Chris. Rob?
Okay.
Yeah, so Chris, what I'll say is that I'll hand over to Sarah first. I've certainly got some comments to make on the parallel pay runs, but I guess I'll hand over to Sarah, who's probably got a bit more detail than me on some of the technicals.
Okay, thank you.
Sarah?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Holly. Yes, the parallel payroll runs aren't, they are part of the contract, so they are being delivered. This is in particular where it's not about the parallel payroll runs per se, it's about the changes that might come out. So obviously, if there's changes that need to be made to the system that are not part of the original contract, then they may be chargeable. So the parallel payroll runs are already part of the existing contract that are being paid for. This particular line is about changes. So sometimes, and we've had things that have changed as well as part of the project because of the time it's run. So there are things that are changing, but with the payroll runs, if things come out that are chargeable changes, then that's what's included in this.
What do you mean by chargeable changes?
So
what would they be? You know, if there's if national insurance contribution changes or that thing, I would have thought that would have been it. The only thing I could think of is the numbers or something of that nature.
No, if it was, for example, so if it's a requirement, so we do the parallel payroll run. If there is a change that is needs to be made because it's statutory, so as you say, if it's about national insurance, then that would be part of the contract, and the contractor would make those changes. But if it's something that needs to be changed, particularly because of how Swansea operates, it's a Swansea difference locally, then that would be a chargeable change because it's something that we're making.
Right.
So that's the difference. So, and that's what we don't know. So some of those will be unknown. And again, this budget may not be needed. So we'll see what comes out of those parallel payroll runs. I'm just picking up on your two other questions. Yes, the reports. So this is a significant number of reports that help with the automation in finance. And as you say, it is those validation reports that help finance validate all the accounts for the auditors and also provide validation on a monthly or period end basis. So it's those kind of reports and it helps with audit. Yes.
There's the audit months one.
Yeah.
And the license cost.
And then the third one around the license costs is because we've got potentially at the end of the project, and this has happened with some other councils, Oracle will come in and do an audit of our licensing, and obviously the licensing has changed over time. Now, and you yourself might have been to this before, but it is the thing where we've got to make sure that not only have we got the right users, but the right users of the right module and at the right level. And it's, as you know, Oracle licensing is quite complex. So this is, we think we're accurate at the moment, and we do keep monitoring it all the time. But again, this is just to make sure at the end of the project, we're not caught unawares by any auditing of that. And again, hopefully that won't be needed, but that's basically for that one as well.
So the licensing is actually to do with super users or non-super users, and it would be the category of use from A down to whatever the levels you're going to use. Okay, thank you very much.
I just ask, what's the life of this new system? I mean, Oracle, what, 10 years is it? Oracle lasted something. What's the life of this new system?
Well, one of the benefits of cloud is that it's constantly changing, which is the benefit of moving to a cloud system. So there are quarterly updates globally by Oracle, and there's a user group that put suggested changes forward, and then they're made to the system, and then they're released on a quarterly basis. And then there's a big release at year end for year end type of functionality. But the benefit of the cloud is that it's constantly evolving and developing. But we would anticipate that the life of this kind of product, we're looking at 10 or 20 years with this. So,
isn't it the case, Sarah, with Oracle, that when we have, as part of the licensing agreement, the updates are then become, I'm not sure if they're free, but I understand that they are given to us as part of the package?
They are, yes. And actually, with the cloud product, they are mandatory, so you have to put them in as well.
Yeah.
I think you can defer 1 or 2, as I recall, but you do have to put them in because they're important upgrades to the system. So it does keep you current.
And it's also validated protection?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Rob, did you want to come back?
No, I got nothing further to add to what Sarah said. I think she's covered it perfectly.
Okay, I've got another question. This £6.1 million, which is attributed to COVID. In the report, you say you're going to try to recover this from the Welsh Government. Given that the Welsh Government has made it quite clear over the last couple of years that they're not prepared to meet ICT costs which arise from COVID, how confident are you that the Welsh Government are likely to cough up this money?
Well, I get a little less confident every day, especially given that the Welsh Government is now looking at a severe dent in its budget, and I'm sure they're going to be doing exactly the same as we're doing in terms of trying to understand what the future holds for their budget. So I guess any headroom and flexibility that they may have had is fast diminishing, but that shouldn't mean that we shouldn't try, because
no.
I think we're in a very different position to most other authorities, because we were going through a specific migration when others were not going through the same journey at the time the pandemic hit. And we in good faith with Welsh Government ministers wanted to do the best for our residents and our businesses by prioritising the help to people to keep businesses afloat, to keep residents ensuring they got the money they needed during the COVID crisis. And I know everybody on the committee and everybody in the meeting would prioritise resources in that way. What we need to do now, though, is to just go back to Welsh Government and remind them of why we did that and the cost to this council of doing that. Because in essence, we've been unlucky in that respect, that we had a migration that we had to therefore not take forward in the same way that we would have wanted to. So, I'm certainly up for a very, very robust discussion with the Welsh Government finance teams and ministers to see what we can do in terms of the requests that we've got.
Okay, it just seems that given the Welsh Government's previous attitude towards ICT costs, that maybe this has been put in to sweeten the pill. I'm just wondering, do you have any sort of timescale by which you'd like it to have a response from the Welsh Government, or is this an ongoing situation?
It's ongoing, Peter, and as you know, I'm tenacious with my arguments.
I'm well aware of that, Rob, yes.
Chairman, can I ask, Leader, if we can't get this money back, this 6.1 million, if we can't get that back, that comes out of our revenue or capital budget?
Capital.
It's a capital spend, but of course we've used previously the capital equalisation reserve,
yes,
which Mr. Smith has always said is a revenue reserve. So either way, if the Welsh Government aren't able to assist us or are unwilling to assist us, then it'll come out of our reserves one way or the other.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Anybody else got any questions on this report at all? I feel like I've hogged it. No? No. Okay, right. Can I thank you very much, Rob? I'll most probably pop into Cabinet on Thursday just to give an update on the committee's view on this. So can I thank you very much for coming in and presenting this report to us, and Andrea as well, and Sarah, and the Interim Director of Corporate Affairs as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Cheers.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, right, moving on then to item 8, which is the membership of scrutiny panels and working groups. You'll note from the report some changes, and we've added Cheryl Philpott to the Adult Services Performance Panel, and also to the Child and Family Services Performance Panel, and Sarah Keaton to the Road Safety Working Group. So hopefully that meets everyone's everyone's happy with that. Okay, just as the leader's now left, I'm just going to come back to that report then. On terms of that report, I mean, I'm going to write a letter and present it to the Cabinet on Thursday. Does anyone have any views about what I say? I mean, I think there are concerns which need to express about the increase in costs and the possible overruns. I think that there is also concerns about whether the Welsh Government are going to cough up the money we're going to ask them for. So, I mean, does anybody any other views they want to add to that or disagree with that view? No. Okay. Oh, Chris Holly, yeah.
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying. I think there's a couple of aspects there. One, definitely about whether or not we will get the 6.1 million back from the Welsh Government. I think that's very, very important. The other thing I'm concerned about is something that Sarah said, and that is the ongoing changes at the end of the programme and the use of the licenses. I think we need to be very, very sure about how we go about this, because given the way that Oracle and many of these software companies work, they'll come back and audit and say, oh, well, instead of 25 users at A level, you've got 50. So that license goes up from 300,000, say, to 400,000. So I think it's very important that we keep an eye on that audit and how much money we're spending on that.
On the new system now, Chris?
Yes.
Yeah. So we're basically saying that they need to be very certain about making sure they get the number of licenses right at the very beginning to avoid any additional costs.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. Okay, thank you for that. Right, so item 9 then is a scrutiny work programme. You will note for the next meeting, we're going to have a slightly larger meeting, because we're going to kick up on the scrutiny of fly tipping, which was lost when we had to cancel the meeting because of the Queen's funeral. We've also got the annual corporate safeguarding report, which is social services. So we'll have Louise Gibbard here for that. And we're also going to follow up on the workforce scrutiny working groups. We do try to follow up on reports and letters to make sure that we are monitoring and making sure that that our recommendations are which have been accepted, particularly are followed through. So, are we all happy with that? Okay, and then item 10 is the scrutiny letters, which is for information. We've written on the.
Sam's got his hand up.
So?
Sam's got his hand.
Sam, sorry, yeah, okay, Sam, sorry, yeah.
Yeah, sorry, Peter. I was waiting patiently. Just on the previous item.
Yeah.
With regard to the letter that you're going to write, could that be circulated to the committee just so we can see the letter?
Yeah. That is normal practice, Sam. Yes, we'll be doing
there
that.
There we go. Brilliant.
Yeah, so Bridge will be working overnight on it, and you'll get it tomorrow morning. We'll be all there sometime tomorrow. He's not going to be able to watch the football. Okay.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Peter.
Okay, lovely. Scrutiny letters. We have the archives. We've scrutinised the last meeting, which we actually staged in August, and there's no need for a response to that. But we have sent the committee's views on that. Then item 11 is the date and time of upcoming scrutiny panel working groups for information. So I think that covers all the business we've got today. Can I thank you all very much for attending, and I will see you at the next meeting. Terry. Yeah, well, it's only 4:30 today because we meant to have a council meeting beforehand, Terry. Yeah, okay, well, so it'll be 4 o'clock next time, unless they schedule another council meeting beforehand, which hopefully they won't do. Thank you very much, everybody, for attending. Thank you.